We often come across the term robust data architecture. What does it actually mean, and why is it critical for modern enterprise for real-time analytics specifically?
The architectures that I've worked with within the last 5 or 6 years, kind of three major building blocks to that. You could argue four, I guess.
The Fluid Intelligence podcast from Factspan is our attempt to empower the data and AI community with insights and perspectives from the enterprise world. I'm excited to unpack today's topic, building a robust data architecture for real-time analytics and decision-making. In today's dynamic landscape of modern enterprises, the ability to make the right real-time decisions can be a game changer. But to get there, you need robust data architecture capable of managing the rapid influx of vast volumes and diverse types of data generated continuously. Why is this so important right now? Consider the last time that you had to wait on a report or had to make a decision based on outdated and inaccurate data. It is crucial to enable timely informed decision that enhances your competitive advantage, improves operational efficiency, and boosts customer experience, while at the same time ensuring risk management and regulatory compliance. In today's podcast, we delved into what is meant by robust data architecture, exploring from foundational concepts to the intricacies of building an effective tech stack. Jack shared his insights on why streaming data may not be the top priority for some enterprises, while highlights the growing importance of platforms that offer integration as a service. We also discussed the significance of advocating for proof of concepts and the rising buzz around generative AI copilots. One of the standout moments from our conversation is Jack's take on the often debated separation between technology and business decisions in an enterprise. He breaks this unnecessary categorization of the term. It is a decision, period. Towards the end of the episode, Jack also shares how his commitment to fitness fuels his professional drive and helps him tackle challenges at work. If you are looking to expand your understanding of enterprise data architecture, I encourage you to dive deep with me in this episode. Today, I have with me Mr. Jack Haynes, a seasoned enterprise architect, to share his perspective on building a robust data architecture for real-time analytics and decision-making. Jack has over 25 years of experience in IT architecture, management, technical leadership, and project management. He has worked at prominent organizations including Grant Thornton Advisors, American National Bank of Texas, Mitchell Martin, and Bank of America, among others. Jack, welcome to our podcast. We are really excited to learn from your experience.
Thank you, and thanks, Factspan, for having me on today. I'm excited to participate in this. It's an exciting time with the evolution of Gen AI and where we're headed with data and all the possibilities that brings. It's been an amazing journey to watch this transpire over the last 25 years. I will say, though, that during this discussion, my responses are based on my experience. They're not necessarily the views of any of the past companies I've worked for.
Thank you, Jack. So, Jack, let's get started with getting an overview of your background and your journey in data architecture leading to your current roles.
Sure. So, believe it or not, started out of college programming with punch cards and went and evolved through that to being a programmer analyst, to a project leader, to a supervisor of developers, to an architect. So a lot of different roles. Throughout that journey, data has been a mainstay through every step of that journey. The applications, the capabilities that we bring forward are all fueled off data, as many of us know. So that's been the most exciting part. I think the last probably 5 or 6 years have been the most interesting, where we've been able to process much more massive amounts of data and do it relatively fast, run analytics, stream it in real time, get insights almost immediately, know our customers completely. So it's really been quite exciting.
That's truly remarkable journey. Thank you for sharing. And you are absolutely right. Last 5 years have been very transformative in this space. So let's begin the discussion with a fundamental question, Jack. We often come across the term robust data architecture when we discuss any project. So, in your view, what does it actually mean, and why is it critical for modern enterprise for real time analytics specifically?
Right. So the architectures that I've worked with within the last 5 or 6 years, kind of three major building blocks to that. You could argue four, I guess. You have your source data, which could be enterprise data, master data on your customers, transactional activities, that kind of thing. But then also you've got third-party information you tend to blend into that. A lot of companies that I've worked for, especially in the financial space, have to do a lot of due diligence before they can actually work with a particular customer. OFAC check's probably the most common one that's done. So you oftentimes need to do that check, save away some of the due diligence information, and leverage that then in your journey. But that's the starting place. You need to get that data moved into a target typically. And the iPaaS platform is maybe the next major building block of that. And by iPaaS, I want to clarify that I'm talking about integration platform as a service, not infrastructure. So it's with the double A in the middle. And then the third leg of that then would be your target. And what we've been working with in the last few years is cloud data warehouses. Number of vendors in that space, from Snowflake to Microsoft to Google. And that is, where you're going to be storing a lot of your information. Your data warehouse will live there, your data lakes. You can stream data in there and so forth. So those are the major 3-4 pieces I see that make up the architecture.
That's right. And just to follow up on that same point, assuming you consider data architecture like a Lego block, how would you stack it up? What are the core components and how do they interconnect in a real data architecture, real-time data architecture?
So before one embarks on this journey, and oftentimes this is referred to as digital transformation, I recommend running POCs. There are various iPaaS vendors. I like Gartner Forrester reports to start out with to kind of select a couple and then run a proof of concept with that platform against your source data, and then likewise choose a cloud provider. When I was talking about the three major building blocks, I did leave out kind of the analytics front end, whether that be Power BI, Tableau, and what have you. That would be the ultimate endpoint, I guess, where a lot of your business users are running their analytics and reporting against that data. But in terms of the after you've completed a POC and you've picked your product, then I recommend building patterns, if you will, and components that support those patterns. And within the iPaaS platform, typically they will have templates that support like building a dimension, building a slowly changing type 2 dimension or a type 3 dimension. And likewise, building a fact or moving streaming data in. You'll have templates for those typically that are provided. So you leverage those as your Lego blocks, if you will, for your most common patterns that you're going to run into for your enterprise. I have to confess, most of the organizations I've run into, streaming is very popular now and talked about a lot. A lot of the organizations I've worked for don't have a demand for real-time data. They'll say once a day, twice a day is typically all we need. I don't need it real time. I will say, though, if you're going to do it, if you want to future-proof your design, you really ought to look at the streaming pattern and leverage that where you're moving data in blocks, maybe initially through Amazon S3 or something, and then into something like Snowflake, and doing that in the batches, and that keeps your data almost near real time. That way you've got a near real time reflection, 360 degree customer is very important to you, you will have that. But back to the sort of the Lego building blocks, those are the structures. Now, within your cloud data warehouse, you're going to have similar building blocks that coincide to that for a data warehouse. So one of the platforms, you have a database, data warehouse. So you need that predefined, and you need to be able to build those rapidly, especially to support self-service. There's going to be situations where you don't have enterprise data in an enterprise warehouse. Maybe you have a group that has their own data and they need to stand up quickly a database, data warehouse, and they need to work in their own world. The newer platforms are very easy to use. They're bringing in Copilot, generative AI technologies to make them even more easy to use in terms of you don't need to be a SQL expert now. You can generate that fairly rapidly with Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, and even the Copilot capabilities within the cloud data platforms. So that Lego building block can be pre-built, predefined, so you can do that very rapidly. Likewise, even we talked about Power BI, Tableau, and what have you, there would be the ability to build maybe common dashboards. But I will say with some of the Copilot capabilities now in Power BI and some of those other tools that are starting to proliferate or show up as well, you very easily can create common visualizations against the data, and it will analyze the data and suggest some. So you can almost quickly build a dashboard that's quite insightful with really little knowledge, deep knowledge of Power BI. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about what's going on and so enthralled with what's happened over the last year or two. But that's a little bit about all the different potential Lego blocks and options and opportunities you have, all driven by your business and business needs, of course, and what's most prevalent in terms of a business need in your organization. And that can vary. I mentioned streaming not necessarily being something I've run into that customers jump on right away, but that could be very different in your organization.
That's true, and that's a great perspective. One of additional points I'd like to add is in our experience, like you mentioned, different layers of that Lego block or different blocks itself, be it reporting, be it analytics tool, Gen AI, or the data lake. One of the common principles while putting it all together is the architectural principles of modularity, composability, reusability that have become really critical as you try to integrate these different blocks. And that's where we are seeing whichever tools are making advancements or the cost perspective, companies want to be able to have that flexibility to switch it as and when needed based on the client contexts or their company's roadmap.
Those are excellent points, and I really like that comment about principles. That comes up a lot today with the journey we're on in the current organization I'm working with. And I think it's important to establish those up front. I think it's in a larger organization, it's difficult to get those adopted and get everybody to agree with them. You can spend months on them. I would start small with some simple ones at a high level and then decompose them and have second layer principles underneath those. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to do that work while you consider your transformation activities and I suggested a POC, maybe in concurrent. While that's going on, you're thinking about what are the principles we want to follow and adhere to so that we get things built consistently. In a lot of organizations, we rely on various providers to complete our work. So I think it's important to have those principles to guide consistent delivery.
Great. And you touched upon POC a couple of times. So that brings me to the next question, because I think you have a point there from your learning. What are some of the major challenges you have faced in such a data integration project, and what would be your recommendation to overcome them?
So I think relating back to a proof of concept as it relates to maybe data integration, I think you want to pick something that's fairly small, fairly easy to implement. And that's a bit of a negotiation back and forth. The POCs I've run from a data integration perspective, the vendor essentially has agreed to do those at no cost, right? With the expectation that, they have a potential for a future agreement with you that may be somewhat long-term and substantial. So you want to keep those small, not only so that they're very engaged and there's a clear beginning and an end, but I think so that everyone knows exactly what you're trying to accomplish and prove from a hypothesis perspective with this POC. And that may be that your delivery time, if you will, of bringing in data and integrating it into applications begins to shrink. That may be your hypothesis, correct? So if that is in fact the hypothesis, then you want to build a use case that supports that, and then also some tests, and again, keeping it small, and so that you can bring that back and share that with your stakeholders. I would also suggest that you want to be very business driven with every activity you do. So I think it's important that the business have a vantage point into what you're doing in terms of a POC. I wouldn't run it just purely technical. I'm not a real big fan of this. Well, that's a technology decision. That's a business decision. It's a decision, right? And anymore, they are highly commingled. And I think getting that business perspective and early involvement and making sure you're tied back to the business with some clear benefits is critical.
Absolutely, Jack. I think that's a great point because it shows up when you actually scale and look for adoption. So that early engagement is really helpful to be able to later on enforce that adoption, increase that business value from such implementations. Great. So moving on, again, there is so much buzz around Gen AI and how enterprises are evaluating ways to leverage it. So what has been your role and learning so far in this space?
A lot of learning. Had a group that got together. This is probably common in every organization, that represented all the different parts of the organization to look at generative AI, skill up on what it is and its capabilities, its limitations, understand what a hallucination is, and experience it in real time, begin to use the tools. We were using them before, and this is a fast moving area. So Microsoft, is probably many of us have witnessed, have come out with numerous copilots. The term copilot began to become somewhat confusing in our organization, probably in many, because everyone has a copilot now. So what do we mean when we say copilot? But through that learning, I think it's become crystal clear from in our organization anyway, where Bing Copilot fits versus Copilot Studio versus, for instance, going into Azure and being able to build a custom Copilot, and where each one of those fit and where the use cases apply that are best applicable to that. Because you don't want to go build a custom Copilot when I can just go into Bing Copilot and do the same thing. Or if we're not talking about Microsoft, we're talking about OpenAI and ChatGPT and their enterprise edition, similar kind of situation where you don't want to invest a lot of time building something custom, where you can just go in and build your own little GPT and you get a solution. So I think it's important to understand Gen AI, all the tools, and if you're a Microsoft shop, then understand the different copilots, what they can do, and make sure you're leveraging those to the maximum before you go invest in building things that can be done with a Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? It takes notes for you, it transcribes for you, and does those kinds of things. So it doesn't make sense to build a custom one that does that, right? For instance. So that's kind of been our journey. I think we're building out strategies and as well, and principles. Again, you mentioned those earlier when we were talking about application integration. I think those same building blocks are there. The challenge is it's moving so fast. You can't build principles for something that's not rolled out, understood, and you've actually used. So it's a situation where you kind of got to get the experience with it first and then begin to build either decision trees or principle, whatever is going to help guide the organization to get the maximum value, maximum reuse, and not make bad investments.
I think our experience, Jack, is very much aligned to what you just said. We have been working with multiple clients, but the focus, like you mentioned, has been on educating the stakeholders what it is, what are the risks involved, what are the different choices and tools and technology, and how do you build that strategy to prioritize which use cases, how will you quickly show value, and then kind of work with them on scaling it. So I would say 90% of the focus still with the companies is to validate it and build their strategies around it before they even think about scaling it.
Well said. Well said. Agree 100%.
Great. So we're moving.
A lot of the Copilot capabilities are starting to show up even in your iPaaS platforms, in your cloud data warehouses. So it's key to understand when it's going to show up in a given platform you work with and how you can leverage it. And, wait 3-4 months, probably be there. No sense trying to build something if that in fact is going to evolve. So it's important to understand the roadmap for the products that you're working with and when generative AI is going to show up.
Absolutely. I think one of the main reasons where customers are looking at building something custom is more from the security perspective and the security risk compliance perspective. But most companies and most tools are incorporating those principles to ensure that. And if you're working with those partners, that aspect actually is evolving really fast in the industry with that concern kept in mind. So you're absolutely right. You need to know the roadmap of the partners you're working with, tools and technology that you're working with as well.
Great point. Right. I would suggest you probably want to build a catalog of use cases, but also maybe even some of the prompt engineering stuff and possibly a separate catalog for the organization to facilitate reuse, much like you would do that with web services or APIs, right? Have a self-discovery place for your organization, especially if it's large, so that people aren't reinventing the wheel and understand how somebody solved a problem using Copilot Studio or whatever capability they used. So I think by having sort of that registry of AI, but also the upfront review also by legal compliance in those organizations, I think is a key piece too. So those are excellent points you bring up.
Great. All right. So moving on to some of the emerging trends that is impacting how you are building and enhancing data architectures to be future ready. What would your perspective be on some of these trends?
Well, there's several trends, right? I think streaming, as I brought up before, I'm of the opinion now, because the streaming pattern is built considerably different than just landing data and then importing it through an iPaaS job or something into a table in your cloud data warehouse, be that table being dimensionalized in a warehouse or whatever, really doesn't matter. But that streaming pattern needs to be considered carefully, because I think that does future-proof you in some cases. So I would look to that and consider that as a preference. And it may be that for your organization, you want to build maybe a decision tree and or principles that say, that's kind of the preferred way. The other thing is storage has gotten very, very cheap. So another principle that might benefit your organization that's worth looking at, in my opinion, would be to, when you go and grab a source set of data, oftentimes your requirements will be very narrow. My perspective is just grab it all, store it all, because what's happening, I'm seeing pattern wise, is they'll come back. Oh, I want this additional data on it. Oh, I want this. I want that. Over the span of 6 months to a year, you may have to open that back up, change it 3, 4, 5 times. If you grab it all at once, drop it, then that's, given storage is cheap now, might be a better pattern to adopt. I think the introduction of generative AI is making everybody learn a lot faster. And I think having SQL skills, when I can go into OpenAI, ChatGPT, open it up, describe a business problem and get basically a database schema, if you will, built for me, and generate the SQL code from it, is powerful. And I would begin to introduce those and, to some extent, demand my MSP to begin to adopt those in their building and or enhancing any given solution going forward, because it greatly reduces the risk of coding errors, will help them build more secure code, more efficient code. We're on a path where a lot of the shifts now are to consumption-based platforms, right? Either your iPaaS solution, your cloud warehouse, whatever, is on a meter. So the more efficiently you run it, the less you use, much like electricity, right? So I think it's important to begin to leverage Gen AI at every step to build more efficient solutions, to even ideate. I've seen situations where you can build through ChatGPT, you can create virtual identities and have them debate back and forth an optimal solution representing different viewpoints. And that actually is kind of interesting because it gives you a way of stepping back and looking at those responses, and it introduces an element of creativity in your design. So that might be something you might want to adopt and consider too, that's an emerging technology. So there's just so many opportunities like this that are surfacing, given how cheap storage has gotten, given the evolution of Gen AI, and given most things are now moving towards sort of a consumption-based paradigm, if you will.
That's a great list. On the last point, I will just add one. What we have heard and we have been working on with some of our clients is the data mesh and data fabric, which is becoming important because it influences the whole how you do the data management in a decentralized way or in a data product perspective. So that's also one of the areas I would say I am seeing a trend of companies adopting one or the other based on their context.
Sure, I think that to some extent facilitates not having to go to centralized IT all the time. And that's not, I'm not saying going to centralized IT is a bad thing, but a lot of times business needs answers, responses, needs their data now, needs to analyze it now. So all these tools that enable faster delivery back to the business is a good thing. And the more you can adopt them into your organization, the better. With proper governance, obviously, and adopting principles and ensuring they're compliant and secure and all those things.
Absolutely. All right, so that brings us to the last question that I had, which was, I heard about you participating in the Hyrox World Championship, most recently at Paris in France. Tell us about the event and your experience, and how do you balance that with your work?
Great question. I started doing Hyrox last year at some nudging by some coaches at the gym I go to. And I'm glad I did it. I did the first one with a partner, which is a great experience. And Hyrox is 8,000-meter runs that you do inside, typically like a convention center. Here in Dallas, K. Bailey Hutchinson is where they do it. So they build a circular course that you run, and you usually do 3 laps. And then you go inside, and there are functional exercises set up, and there's 8 of them. Ends in 100 wall balls. Starts usually with skiers, and you have to do 1,000 meters. You have a sled pull, sled push, significant weights, burpee broad jumps, and so forth. So that's kind of how the High Rocks event works. I did, like I said, the first one in Dallas, did fairly well with a partner, enjoyed it a lot. Then I got another nudge from the coach. Hey, go try to do Mexico City. Maybe given your age, you could, they call it platform, meaning you get a first, second, or third place. And I'm like, I'm never done anything like that. I'll give it a shot. And I've never been to Mexico City. So I did it and I won, but there's only 2 or 3 in my age group. So I have an age card, I guess I can play. But that was great. And then, of course, by getting first place, then they're going, oh, well, you're invited to High Rocks Worlds in Nice, France. So, you should consider that. I only had a month to make the decision. You have to make the decision 48 hours. So I went ahead and did it. Now, it was humbling because then you've got 40 of the best in the world because they run these events all year long at different cities. And everybody that gets first place or second, depending on the segment you're in, age group and sex, will get a place at Worlds. So you end up with a pretty big field of people in your group, not just 2 or 3 like I do at a regional event, but you'll end up with 40. And it was humbling. I got humbled, there's no question. But it was great. I finished. I was happy with that. It was hot, sweaty, challenging. I didn't run until 7:30 at night, but I love doing it. I love and feel very, very blessed to be able to do it and continue to do it and try to do some sort of activity like this to challenge myself for as long as I can. So we'll see. Knock on wood, I'll be able to do it again next year and the year after.
That's truly inspiring, Jack, and challenging yourself from the fitness perspective, no matter what the age is. I think that is truly something that we all should be doing. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Yes, I do think it also helps you with your work and focus and energy level. And, there's just so many benefits. So I do my workouts in the morning, and I find after I've done that, I'm feeling pretty good about taking on the day's challenges. So it gives you a little motivation to take those on.
Absolutely. All right. So that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you, Jack, for taking time out to share your experience and perspective with our audiences. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this conversation interesting and insightful. If you would like to see more such content, please subscribe to the channel by clicking the bell icon. Also, leave us a comment on your thoughts about building a robust data architecture. See you again in the next episode.